Marine Corps. I retired as doing active duty after World War II as a major. Well, in the Marine Corps, I served in South Pacific, namely the Solomon Islands area, earlier in the war, and later. Then I came back to the States to join the training command in San Diego, and after being back for about a year, I was reassigned to the South Pacific. At that time, this was late in the war, and I was flown to Okinawa to join the Third Marine Amphibious Corps headquarters.
Well, you forgot to mention that you were in the Raiders for part of the time earlier in the war.
Well, I said in the South Pacific and the Solomon Islands.
All right.
And that meant you were in the Raiders, Marine Raiders?
No, I joined the Marine Raiders in American Samoa.
Oh, okay.
And then we moved further west. We went to New Hebrides Islands for a base, and we then trained to go and make the landing on Bougainville of the Solomon Islands.
Mm-hmm.
This was November 1st, 1943. Okay.
Okay. And under what circumstances did you join the Marines and enter the war? Were you drafted, or did you join voluntarily?
No, when I was a senior at University of Connecticut, but the Marine Corps was enlarging so fast that they needed a lot of officers, so they had an officer candidates program, and they went to the various senior classes throughout the country to recruit candidates for a commission in the Marine Corps. I joined this in June of 1941. I was assigned to active duty in the candidates class.
Well, tell a funny story about your mother and the Navy.
That's
part of the sidelights of all this.
All right. My wife wants me to tell you a little humorous story about when I signed up to go to enter the candidates class. After I got through signing up, the recruiting officer said, "Well, tell me, why did you join the Marine Corps?" I says, "Well, to be truthful with you," I says, "I wanted to be a Navy pilot." I said, my parents were getting old, we're old, and I didn't want them worrying about me. So he says, "Oh," and he says, did they object to you joining the Marine Corps?" And I said, "No," and he laughed. And I found out later what he was laughing at.
So that's why you chose the Marines? That's why you chose the Marines?
Yeah, well, I knew I'd probably be drafted and go into the Army.
Either way.
And I had a couple friends in the Marine Corps already, and that's why I chose the Marines.
This was before the war started. This was in the
spring of 41.
41, but the draft had already started. So if you wanted to pick your branch of service you wanted to be, most young men who were signing up for trying to pick their place rather than just be drafted into the Army.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. And where were you living at the time? At UCONN?
Well, I signed up out at UCONN, yes. There was quite a few that joined the Marine Corps, not to enter the candidates class from UCONN, but I think I was the only one from our class at UCONN, in the first group that went into the candidates class.
Okay. And where and how did the two of you meet?
It was just kind of being in the same group. I'd be invited to different parties at the fraternity house. And we always laughed at that because they were a bunch of athletes. And they decided to give a tea on Sunday afternoon. And they needed some little advice on how you gave a tea. So they invited different sorority girls up, and I was one of them. And we always laughed about, we asked one fellow would he have tea or lemon, and he said he'd have both. And so then we used to see each other at church, and then there was a place where we'd go after Mass to have a breakfast because the dining hall was closed by that time. And standing in line for a breakfast, he asked me to go to a Greek letter dance. And her first date was ice skating on Mirror Lake at UCONN.
And what year was that?
1940.
1940. Okay. And so that you two started dating at that point?
Yeah, we dated a lot. Went to dances, but we were going out with other people. And then we never dated again until after he was overseas. We started writing.
Oh, okay. So when he went to the war, you guys started writing to each other?
Sometime after that,
Okay.
a couple of years after that.
Okay. Grandpa, how did you feel when you first had to leave for the war?
What was that again?
How did you feel when you first had to leave for the war?
Well, I wasn't anxious to go, but I knew it was something we would have to do, because it was just hope for the best. That was all.
And did you had to go to training before you started actual combat?
Oh yes, we had. I had about 9 months of training at Quantico, Virginia. After I immediately got out of UCONN. I graduated on June 8th or so, and I was in the Marine Corps on June 21st.
Wow. How much time in between?
Now, what else was it that you?
I had just asked what was going on between the time that you first started and when
I
you first went
went
to
to
combat.
all these schools at Quantico for 9 months, and where was it at the time in the spring of '41? No, the spring of '42.
After the war started.
In the spring of '42, I was in the field artillery school, and they cut the class short and shipped about 20 of us out to South Pacific to join the various Marine units. And I went to American Samoa, where I stayed for about 9 months, and then joined what was known as the 4th Raider Battalion. And we later went into the Bougainville on the Solomon Islands.
Is that where you were first involved in combat?
Yes, still.
Okay. What is the most disturbing thing you remember from
Oh.
any of the battles?
What was that?
The most disturbing thing that you remember? Or things, I'm sure there were more than one.
Well, the first night in combat, my company was assigned to go up to set up a roadblock on what was known as the Beaver Trail in Bougainville, and there was fighting, but I wasn't involved in the original landing, and because my mission was to go up and immediately go up the Piva Trail to set up a roadblock to stop any Japs from coming down. And so there wasn't any action really for my company that until late in the afternoon. And as it was getting dark, one of our men, I had people out in front of the lines to warn us of any Japs approaching. And when it got dark, I was drawing them back, and one of the fellow men forgot his rifle, and without saying anything, he went back to get it, and he didn't come back. But then it was dark, and nothing, we couldn't go out and look for him then in the dark, particularly when we didn't know
where you were.
And think that he must have been grabbed immediately because he was alone. And I didn't know he was doing this until it was too late.
Because he didn't tell you? Because he didn't tell anyone?
Well, he told some of his other Marines that were with him, but why he went out there alone, I don't know.
There's always something funny. Tell us a funny story about the pack while we
Oh, no, I
Go on, they like funny things like that. Go ahead.
This is, my wife wants to tell you the story about how I killed a Jap. We were, the Japs, some of them would roll around trying to break in, and we operated under the premise that anybody moving without acknowledging their presence was a Jap. So we were there, and I knew there were Japs. We knew there were Japs around, but none of us had come in contact with them. And suddenly, I had my pack. I had laid it on the ground beside the foxhole, and that fell. It was kicked into the foxhole, and I thought it was a Jap that got lost, and I stabbed hell out of it, and it turned out it was my pack. And what a relief that was, because then I thought that I had did it to one of the Marines because I found a weapon that was mine, but I didn't realize it. And then when I realized afterwards, I had a small pistol and a rifle, and when I feeled around what I thought was the body, I found my gun, my pistol, and rifle. And I knew I was the only one in the company that had a pistol and a rifle.
Did you ruin any of the things in
So
your bag?
I realized then that was my pack that I mutilated.
Did you rip everything up? Did you rip everything in the bag up?
Did I what?
Did you rip it all up? Was anything ruined?
Oh no, I stabbed it and I had holes in it in the back after.
Okay.
He didn't get a medal for that.
How did you stay in touch with your family and grandma?
Oh, mail. They had what they had. Email. You could write a letter, and it would be copied and mailed electronically or somehow to and then
It was like reduced in size. It was about the size of a notepad.
and then later on the mail got better. But when our daughter Darcey was born, I was at
Well, that's when you went back again, the second
Oh,
time.
yeah, the second time, that's a little early.
So in the beginning, how often did you receive and send letters back and forth? Were you able to?
Oh, yeah, well, we had time to. We weren't in combat, we were just in training, and we had free time to write letters. And so I wrote to my family and a few friends back home, and to Polly.
And his football coach, tell about Christie writing and telling his newsletter.
Yes, that's right. Coach Christian, the football coach at UCONN, was a former Marine too in World War I. But he kept in touch with everybody that played football, and we had a newsletter that would go out periodically. So we used to look forward to that, because then we would know where certain people were. And because of that letter, I was able to look up a couple people that I wouldn't have known where they were otherwise.
And were a lot of those boys in the war that they were keeping up on?
Yes, he was doing this for all
All
the
the boys
newsletters on the people who were in the service.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. That's kind of cool.
See, and you see, it's very, very different. There were very few young male civilians around. There were 11 million people in the service. And you can imagine that. So,
You guys must have been lonely back home.
Well, I don't know, a funny story about a neighbor of mine who went into the Marine Corps before I did. He was hoping to be, he wanted to become a Marine pilot, and he was getting ready to, almost ready to be sent to flight school when he was sent overseas. And when I went out to the Pacific. I went to American Samoa, and I saw the Marine headquarters. So I went in to ask him if they had a Sergeant Hart, and they said yes, he's not here. He's out out in the field where they had the planes. He was a mechanic on a plane, and where they would be protected on all sides except the entrance to this high mound. And he was working on when they found out that I was a friend of his, they said, well, we'll drive you out there. You could get lost. So they drove me out to where he was. And he was working on the plane. I saw him. They said, there he is. When I walked over there, and I says, all right, Bougainville, let's get this fixed. Well, he probably jumped out of his shoes, because the only one that ever called him Bougainville was his brother and myself. So, because this was an American Samoan, then I was sent to British Samoa, but he used to be able to, and I had been defending an area of the airfield on the beach, and he could fly over occasionally from American Samoa to British Samoa, and then we would get together. And then when I left, of course, I didn't see him until after the war.
Oh, well, he made it out too?
Oh yes,
That's good. That's good. Okay. Another question I had was, how were you connected to the 6 men who raised the flag in Iwo Jima?
Well, back in 1944, I came back to the States, and a lot of us came back, and one of them was Michael Strank, who was one of my sergeants, and he was
one of your sergeants in Bougainville, you mean?
Yeah, yes.
Right.
the rest of the outfit was assigned to different outfits. Most of them were assigned to the 5th Division and went into Iwo Jima. And this Michael Strike was one of them. And he was one of the men that put the flag up on Iwo Jima. And he was killed a couple of days later.
So did you know him personally?
Oh yeah, he was one of my sergeants at Bougainville. I knew him well.
Do you know how many battles you fought in? You were involved in combat?
Oh, not too many. I spent a lot of time overseas before we did anything. And then when I came back to the States, I was stationed in San Diego in the training command for almost a year, and then I went back out again. When I went back out again, I went straight to Okinawa, which was the last battle in World War II.
Mm-hmm. And when you were in San Diego, you were training new Marines?
Training Marines, we were training the new men that came in, preparing them for combat.
So you told us your rank a little bit earlier, and due to your rank that you held, what jobs in specific did you have? Not only training men, but when you were in combat and when you came back?
Well, in combat, I was a company commander. I had about 100 men or so in the company, well, more than that, to be in charge of. Then when I came back, went back out the second time, I went to the 3rd Corps headquarters in the operations section. I didn't have many men under me then. Right then, we were. This was the staff for the Corps. Yeah, we had men, but not only a few that they needed for doing the planning and so forth that we had to do.
Okay. And Grandma, what was your life like back home during the war?
Well, I was 2 years behind my husband, so when the war broke out, I was a junior in December of '41. Now, him and a lot of people in his class, and even lower than that, who just quit college and joined up, very patriotic. So you could see the difference on the campus. Right away, things changed very drastically. I was looking for my ration books and found them. Hold on, where did I put them?
Right there.
What? Oh, here they
Those
are.
tables.
You want me to come over there, Darcy?
You could sit there.
Here, okay. Everybody, oh, isn't it funny, Darcy even got one, because she was born 2 days before the war, and the war didn't end. I mean, the rationing didn't end. So this is my daughter, who's 61 years old. So we even have one for her, and that's mine.
And what were they for?
All right, they're for everything. They're for meat, they were for vegetables, they were for coffee. Meat was very hard to get, and particularly if you had traded at a store like Stop and Shop. There was no Stop and Shop, but if you traded at a chain store and you really hadn't made a real personal attachment, there was a lot of favoritism going on. It wasn't black marketing, but it was favoritism. They would put things aside for their friends. However, if you'd been going to trade with a private butcher, you were a little luckier than that. Certain things seemed to be hard to. Sugar was very hard to get. Tea and coffee, and I remember tomatoes. canned tomatoes. That was another thing that took, and you had so many points for several things. Some things weren't that popular, I suppose. Anchovies or some things like that probably didn't need many points. And then every so often you would be issued a new book. I can't see if there's a date on this or not. But you even had to have them at college, and the college took care of your book. You were eating in the college dining room. And this was fuel ration. And
Okay, we are back. We're back on.
Okay, well this says fuel oil, and that would be, I think, the fuel oil for the furnace. No, it must, no, for the gasoline that you ran your car on. Because my parents, I don't think, had an oil burner downstairs. I think they still had a coal furnace then. Right now, with fuel oil so high, everybody's turning down their thermostat, but it really got really bleak then. A lot of people were turning it down to 60. And at the sorority house, I remember we asked if they could just turn it up to 65 for at least an hour in the morning while we got dressed. Because if we were cold in the morning, it seemed like we were cold all day. Everything was scarcity. We didn't have a refrigerator. We had an ice box, and the ice box broke down. My mother wanted to buy a refrigerator, and she had to go and get a priority downtown from one of the government agencies, saying that she really had no way of refrigerating her food. She could get cars were not made. All that was going to the war effort. So secondhand cars were at a premium. You know, everybody wanted a good secondhand car. Clothes were actually stipulated. Short skirts were in style, and they were not allowed to make them any longer to save on fabric. So right after the war, there was something came in called the New Look, and the skirts went down to here as like a statement against it. Now they didn't have to have short skirts anymore. I'm trying to think of things that were so good. There was a saying that everybody got so used to. If you complained about anything at all, the person was selling something to say, well, don't you know there's a war on? You got that retort. Everybody, don't you know there's a war on? Trying to think, when you traveled, of course, no one was traveling by plane there unless you had a priority, servicemen. And so if you traveled by bus or by train, it was just so crowded. I just remember going to New York and sitting on your suitcases in the aisles, just mob scenes. And of course, even though there were an awful lot of people overseas, the big cities were filled with service people who were probably a training field around there, like New York would be filled with service people, and they really gave, and everybody was very good to service people. Like they mentioned a bar, won't you say that? Everybody wanted to buy you a drink.
Yeah.
You know, they were just so grateful, the people who were still at home. What else about, oh, I'm sure there's a lot of little...
Did you work when you got out of college?
When I was a school teacher, and right in my hometown of Bridgeport, and I taught, at nighttime I taught a Red Cross course on nutrition that was supposed to help people become qualified to go and be a volunteer in the Red Cross full-time, either overseas or in this country. When he said something about our daughter being born, even though the war was over 2 days later, things were still very hectic. So you got in touch. Supposedly the Red Cross would somehow get a letter to you. It didn't work out awfully well at the time, but because
The Red Cross didn't do anything to help you unless it was an emergency.
right, it wasn't very popular. because he heard about our daughter from Uncle Bob.
Yes, when Darcey was born, I got a letter from my brother congratulating me, but he didn't tell me about what her name was.
A boy or a girl. See, at that time, they had no way of predicting sexes, so you never knew.
So then a week later, I got a email letter from Polly mentioning, giving me the details about it. Because they were, the regular mail was held up because they needed all the planes for transfer for the preparations for signing of the treaty and so forth. All that was all the transportation and mail was only official.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't any personal things for a couple of weeks. And that's why I had to wait 2 weeks to hear anything.
So you didn't know when you got the letter from your brother that
No,
it was a girl?
The Darcey was well, but nothing new.
One of the saddest things was, I remember a friend of mine, her sister, husband was overseas, and she remembers this night, the way people would be notified of a death overseas or an injury was the service people from that particular, either the Marines or the Army or the Navy, would send people out personally. They couldn't, let's say they were way out in the country and they couldn't get out there, they would send you a telegram. But if it was in a city, they would come personally to tell you the bad news. And of course, it was a blackout, remember, a very severe blackout. There were no street lights at all through the war, and you had to darken your windows. Remember up at UCONN, and they'd have a blackout. They'd blow the whistles and have an air raid warning, and then they would be up in these towers trying to see if there were any pinpoints of light, and to go and tell those people, hey, you've got a crack in your. And one of the things was that was a sanctuary light of the Catholic Church, and that's not supposed to go out, but they had to go and tell the priest, hey, that's got to go out. But the saddest thing would be that at nighttime you'd see a car coming with a big flashlight trying to find the numbers on the house, and people would know then, because they would be the only people that would be out in a blackout. Would be people looking to tell them the bad news. And I remember my friend's sister was just in agony until they went past her house. Her husband did return safely. But it was just very, very sad. And particularly when they were, well, just like Vietnam and now and everything, when very young people are going, and just have their whole lives ahead of them. Like our grandson that went to Iraq, and we're so grateful that he's back without anything happening to him. So there are probably lots of other things. It was just so part of our lives. It was just absolutely part of your everyday life. Oh, stockings. You could not get nylon stockings. And that's when leg makeup came in. And once the winter was over, you wore leg makeup. And I think they sell it now. It's like a bronze, if it's called something else. And show you how prices change. You'd get a little bottle like this for 10 cents, and that would do you for a couple of weeks.
What was the blackout for? To save energy, or just so it was dark all over?
Just in case that any planes came through.
Oh, they didn't want.
They never did, but they never knew whether they would or not. Because of course London was like that, blacked out, but of course they bombed them all the time anyway, because they had maps, and they kind of just took a chance where they were, throwing their bombs.
Okay, going back a little bit, when did you two decide to get married? Had you come home for a little while?
Yeah, well, yes, I was stationed in San Diego, and then they sent me to an advanced officers class at Fort Benning, Georgia, an Army base. And Polly came down to visit me at Fort Benning, and we decided to get married at the end of the class. So the class ended on midnight. We had to stay on the post until midnight of Friday night, and I was going to get married Monday morning.
People got married on all kinds of different days. It wasn't always Saturday or Sunday, because just whenever somebody would get leave.
So I was able to get a flight into to Hartford, and I got in Saturday afternoon, and my brother I didn't have a ring, so my brothers, I knew that one of the jewelers in Hartford, and he kept his store open for me to get in on late Saturday afternoon to pick out the ring.
I was looking for that receipt, and I just found it, and then when I went back the second time to get it, it slipped out. I have that. And just to show you the difference, it was the jeweler on Main Street next to the Hartford National Bank, and it was a 3/4 of a carat, and it was $264, and that included the wedding ring also. That ring, the diamond ring, got lost down in the cellar years ago. And then Sunday, we had the rehearsal at night, Sunday night. Remember?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I went down to Bridgeport on Saturday. It was Sunday
No,
afternoon.
Saturday my mother and I came up to your parents after you had gotten a ring, etc., and I got the ring. We had dinner with your parents, and then Mother and I went back to Bridgeport, and you came down the next day, I think.
Well, I had to.
Yeah, then Sunday night we had a quick rehearsal, and Monday morning at 10 o'clock. So when we bought the engagement ring, they said, try it on. I said, no, make it the same size as the engagement ring. And it must have been a little smaller, because that morning he couldn't get, I had to help him push it on. It's never been off since then.
Not once?
Not once, never. Yeah.
Okay. We have the picture here. Let me just
What's
focus.
that, the
This
wedding?
is your wedding
Going
picture.
down the aisle.
Okay. So we have Grandpa wearing one of your uniforms.
Right.
So I'll have you look at it and tell us about it.
About the uniform?
Yeah,
Well, that's the summer.
that one on the right.
The beige
That's the one
one.
he got married in.
That's the summer uniform.
Oh.
And at that time, because you didn't really know, when you finally hear somebody was coming, you'd put a quick notice in the paper, and it would always say, invitations have not been issued, but friends of the couple are invited to attend. So you really never knew at your reception how many people would show up. It was really, it was not the planned weddings now where there's a wedding book like a year ahead of time and going on and on and on, every little detail just so. Things turned out okay.
And I'm assuming both of you had a lot of friends that also served in the war.
Oh, in the war, yeah, because Grandpa didn't have many friends coming to the
Wedding.
wedding because everybody was gone. That one,
One fellow who was didn't pass the physical to get into the Army, so he was the only one that came.
right, yeah. I think that's about the only one of his friends who were there. They were all In fact, you asked somebody to be best man. You thought he was in Rhode Island, and he's tough, and he told you he was leaving.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I had a lot of girlfriends around. There were loads of girlfriends, you know. You didn't have too many dates because there were not that many guys around to go out with. So you were meeting people for dinner at night, you know, girls. We went on one night honeymoon in New York City, and I still have the bill for that. It was about $11 for the room, but that was a lot because we used to go down there to New York for the weekend, and at the Biltmore Hotel, you could get a room for $3.
That was you and your friends, not me.
My
not
friends,
us.
and you could put another cot or two cots in the room for $1 a piece. And the Biltmore was a very nice hotel right next to Grand Central. And there were a lot of people stationed around New York, so you'd have a lot of dates. They had what they call the Prairie State, where they trained what they call 90-day wonders, Navy officers. And
We got married on a Monday, and Tuesday morning I caught a plane to go to report into San Diego.
You had to go back that quickly?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I didn't have leave. I was doing it on travel time. We had 4 days of travel plus, well, it amounted to about 6 days that you could get.
so you had Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and you left on Tuesday. So you were there maybe a day ahead of time. Well, tell them what this important work you had to go back for then, when you got back there.
Oh, that's right. When I reported into, I called it. I did have some leave time available. That's right, and I overlooked that. But I couldn't get it because they wanted me to report in immediately after the end of this class I was in. So all I had was travel time to get to report back in San Diego. And when I got to San Diego, and I asked, called for, see if I could get leave in the general.
Well, by that time it was Camp Pendleton, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because Camp Pendleton had not been built when he first went overseas.
Well, anyway, that doesn't make much difference in this anyway. But General, I called them. They said, "No, we want you to get back here." So I got back. And what did I do? I reported in, and the general apologized. He says, "I'm sorry we couldn't make you leave. Let's give you that time, but." And this was a general that I served under, and in the Bougainville operation in the Pacific. And so what did I've been back in my room that late in one afternoon, and it says, "You've got to take 100 men out to a forest fire up in the mountains, in East Inland." So I went out there, we spent about probably a week or so. I had 100 men. I didn't do anything with them. I just sent them over to the forest rangers, and they assigned what the areas that they were supposed to fight in and so forth. So in the meantime, I was expecting Polly back. I didn't know when I was going to get back to meet her.
I was coming out later.
Did they have to put out a forest fire?
Yeah, and you know where it was?
Well,
Mount Palomar, the observatory at Mount Palomar. You know, I didn't go out for a week, 3 weeks later. I got there, and actually the day I was leaving, it was the day school was starting. And though I had loved the year before when I taught school, on the other hand, I was... Okay. I really was so happy to be leaving. My mother went down with me to New York City, and I got on a train. Really is a wonderful experience, because probably I never would have done it again. Got on a train and went to Washington, and then we left. I stayed on that train, and then we left Washington and went all the way to St. Louis, Missouri, and got off that train sometime the next afternoon, about 12:30, 1 o'clock, and I wasn't going to leave again that night until 12:30. And I decided I'd go out and see the city of St. Louis. And I got to the corner where I was going to cross the street. I don't really know what I was going to do. I was just going to walk around. And what do you know, I bumped into a girl from Bridgeport who had gotten married. Her husband was in the Army. And they didn't have much money, so all she had was a single room, like a rooming house. And she was out with this friend of hers, another Army wife, just to do something. And they were going to lunch, a late lunch, and I'd come along with them. So I went along with them, and we had lunch, and she had been away from Bridgeport for about a year or so, and she just was interested in everybody. We just sat there talking and talking and talking. All of a sudden, it was like 4:30 in the afternoon, and by that time, I was afraid to, I didn't want to be trapped down in St. Louis in the dark and finding my way back to the railroad station. So I guess I said goodbye and I came back. I don't know if the train was ready yet that I was going, because it was a different train. And I got on the train, and then we started and went across. And I remember taking almost a whole day going across Kansas. And it's just like you think fields of wheat every side. And then southwest down into, well, how do the states go? We know we clipped a little bit of Texas, and then through the southwestern states, southwestern Arizona.
New Mexico.
We weren't up as far as New Mexico, Arizona. And then we came up, kind of up. We weren't up just opposite LA, we kind of were down more southern, then came up to LA. And that was a Sunday, and that took from Wednesday until Sunday. So to have a trip across the United States in a train like that was, well, you've had a trip across the United States, you know. And because when we came, well, that's another story. But anyway, he met me, and we had lunch, and we started home back on the train. And the Pages met us in Oceanside, and then we drove back to where he had gotten a small apartment for a friend of his down about 30 miles north of San Diego, a place called Rancho Santa Fe. And we were there for 5 months. But the funny thing about that, LA, and I never was in LA again except to go back and forth. I never had a visit there to go to the movie studios or to any of those places again. We never would. We were going to go to the football game, and we never did that. I don't know, we just never got back there to spend any time there.
No, it didn't happen this time.
But, no, I was only there for September, October, November, December, January, and we left and came back in the mid-February. In fact, we were driving across the country when Iwo Jima was had started, the Battle for Iwo Jima. We were listening on the radio.
So you were driving home, and then you were back in Connecticut when you were sent
But yes, I'm bringing Mother home because I knew I'd be going back out.
And I was expecting Darcey by that time.
So I didn't want to have her caught there under those conditions. So I was able to get leave to drive her home and get a flight back to San Diego.
But it was winter time, and we couldn't go the route we really would love to have gone up farther through Colorado and those prettier states. We had to take basically the same route, even more southern than I'd had on the train. We came out the back of San Diego, the mountains, down to Yuma, Arizona,
Yeah.
over to Las Cruces, New Mexico,
Texas.
Arkansas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went through Texas.
Tennessee.
And it was raining, and it was not a good time. Then by the time we got up to Philadelphia, it was snowing here. And then we came back here. My brother was getting married. He'd been overseas a couple of years before that as a bombardier. And he had come back, and he was in Texas. And so we came back, and he got married. Sam was his best man. And they went back to Texas and waited there till the war was over. Yeah. About that Iwo Jima. These are two articles that were in the paper. This was Grandpa's best friend.
Who's best friend?
Charlie Horvath.
I thought you said Jennifer.
Yours. I said Ham's best friend.
Oh,
And, you can talk a little about Charlie.
He was from Newington,
yes, yeah.
and he fought on Iwo Jima.
He was at Iwo Jima.
We'll tell about how you were friends and how you ended up
Well,
at UConn.
he lived in Newington on the south side of the line, and I lived in West Hartford on the north side of the line. But we went to different schools, but we did go out to UConn together. And then he joined the Marine Corps after I did. And he became a paratrooper. But then the Marines abandoned the paratroopers. They didn't see any more use for them. But he went into Iwo Jima when we were traveling cross country.
And he got the Silver Star at Iwo Jima. And this other one was in the class at UConn between Ham and I. His name was John Winsler. They called him Winsler. And he was co-captain of the basketball team out there. And he was killed at Iwo Jima. And another one of my classmates, Roger Olmsted, was killed at Iwo Jima. And both their names are on the memorial out here, just behind Central. And it's strange that I go through the yearbooks that we have over there. I would write, killed in action, killed an awful lot of names in those books there. It was just very, very sad to hear about that.
Did you guys hear about Iwo Jima before you got home?
Yes, it was on the radio as we were coming across the country. And I remember him saying, Charlie, his friend Charlie's probably there. Because that fall, after I got to California, a lot of those men were still there. And when did they leave? About a month later, after When did they leave? About October or so?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and in fact, one of them, what was his name? Kind of crazy guy. Anyway, he was killed there.
No.
Yeah,
what?
Mears.
Mears.
Yeah, he was killed. But he wasn't the only one. I just remember him one night. We were out and he was acting up and being very funny. So, an awful lot. That was really a very bad campaign. And over there on the wall is one of those little, the Iwo Jima Society from New Britain sent that. I guess the donors keep it up there.
So you guys came back to Connecticut, and Grandpa was sent back. Were you nervous when he was being sent to Okinawa?
Oh yes, and just waiting for the letters all the time. And I was expecting a baby. I was living with my mother and father, and I knew how worried his mother and father were all the time. And later on, of course, he could tell us that he wasn't in that much danger, but at the time we did not know it, and then particularly when you'd hear about then the Okinawa, the things were just, you just knew, and of course nobody knew, and it's so strange now, everything is leaked so much now, but that you would really never know anything about anything until it happened. Maybe some people knew it, but the ordinary civilian didn't know it. And until the atomic bomb was dropped, nobody knew anything about it.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience on Okinawa?
On Okinawa?
Okinawa.
Well, I got there, it was late, it was near the end of that campaign. And I flew in from Guam to Okinawa, and we went aboard that plane about midnight, and everybody was tired, and we were just gonna, and I wake up and leaving the plane in the morning, who had I been sitting beside all night long? It was Lowell Thomas, a famous war correspondent.
He was probably the most famous war correspondent and radio personality, news personality that anybody knew,
And he was going to, just witness the battle?
Yeah, I went to the 3rd Corps Amphibious Corps headquarters on Okinawa. And then the day I got there, the Army general in charge of the whole campaign was killed. And
Who was that?
that was, oh boy, it'll come to me later.
Okay, that's all right.
But his replacement was a Marine general, and I was on his staff in the 3rd Amphibious Corps at Okinawa.
Who was that?
I almost had his name a minute ago.
Oh, was that Laura Johnson's cousin? That one?
No.
Oh, I thought that was,
No.
okay.
This was Geiger, Roy Geiger. He later became commandant of the Marine Corps.
How long were you there until you were sent home for good?
On Okinawa? Well, the war ended, and we came back to Guam, and we were getting ready to go to China, because we were afraid of the communists taking over. And we were leaving on a Monday morning, and Sunday morning, the officer that I reported to called me in. He says, "You have enough points to go home."
That's how they decided who would go home. You'd been the longer, you got so many points.
And he said, "Do you want to stay, or do you want to go to China with us?" And I said, "Well," we just had our first child born, and I'm not going to make a career in the Marine Corps." I said, might as well get back and get started in civilian life. So, in the meantime, just prior to my being called in, two friends of mine from UCONN came out and to see me. And I said to one of them, he was waiting assignment. And I said, "You want to go to China?" And he said, "Yes, I'll go to China." I said, "Let me go and speak to the personnel officer." And I went and spoke to him. He says, "I'm sorry, Cunningham, we can't do anything. All those orders come from Pearl Harbor." So I went back and told him. And then my command, the immediate officer that I reported, and called me in and said that I had enough points to.
Be careful, that's tricky. Don't tear your clothes on.
Called me in and said that if I wanted to know if I wanted to go to China or not. And I said no, because I wanted to get situated in the civilian life. And the fellow that I said tried to fix up to go to China. He got orders from Pearl Harbor to go to China.
So we went anyway.
That was Ray, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We still see him. We have a big Super Bowl party. It used to be big. It used to be about 50 or more of us. Now it's dwindled down. The last time there were only 8 of us.
Okay, sorry about that. So, you were saying?
What was I saying? The war really defined so many things, you know, you didn't think it was going to, but it did change a lot of things, but you never realized it until about 25 years later.
And how did your lives change, immediately after the war, when Grandpa came back and you guys had a house?
Well, the first thing was housing was so short. There'd been no housing really built except emergency housing during the war. So housing was very short. It was impossible almost to get a rent. So a good many couples went and lived with their mothers or fathers. And we lived with his mother and father for 6 months at least.
I don't think so.
November, December, May. Yeah. Just let it hang down. I'll nail it down. Oh, I'm still on. Okay. So we were with his mother and father for about 6 months, and we had applied here in West Hartford to get into it was a government housing project. It had been built. The one we were in was built down behind Beachland Park, and it had been built mostly for war workers. Now, when the war is over, they were letting veterans come in. In fact, I think you had to be a veteran after the war to get in. And so we got into a 4-room duplex, 2 bedrooms, living room and dining room, living room and kitchen, and a pantry, something a lot of places didn't have. Get the baby carriage in there. And then if you had another baby or 2, you would get a bigger place. And we got another one a few years later with an extra bedroom. And then some years after that, the government was going to sell them to the people who were living. And they never did, so we decided to go ahead. We bought this. But some people bought them at quite a reduced rate. And I think they're worth about 20 times something somebody bought for about $8,000 is now worth about $175,000 now. What else? How did that click? Well, it was good to get back with all your friends. There were lots of reunions all the time, getting back together with your friends. Remember one night we were going all the way down to the Norwich Inn for a big reunion. It started snowing, and we were going to go. Now, of course, I'm older now, I think about it, but his father was so upset because they were old. And what's going to happen if you skid on the road and we're too old to take care of that little baby upstairs, and we just wanted to go and get back and see our friends. It had been so long. I think that was in December probably. And then the people who hadn't gotten married, because the people were going overseas, there were loads of weddings. Loads of people got married in 1946 because everybody had come back then. Because that year, I remember, we got invited to so many 50th anniversaries in 1996. But we were fortunate enough that he got home in between times to be married in 44. But
And so do you still keep in contact with some of the Marines today?
Well, we used to have our one class would have a reunion every year. That was the original candidates that became officers. And we had there's about 400 of them. Now it's dwindled down. This is not enough to have a reunion anymore. And most of them are not able to travel much anyway.
and a good many of them are dead. That's right.
Well, I just want to thank you guys for doing this. Is
Well,
there anything else? Any more comments you guys want to make?
About the Marine reunions, we did have a wonderful time with them. Went all over the United States and once to Hawaii, and that was fun. But the last one was in Dallas, and they made the sad decision that it was just too hard to arrange for the hotels and the tours, and there were fewer and fewer people every year. And it was too bad, because you knew some of them you were not ever going to see again.
What year was that?
2 years ago,
Yeah.
2 years ago. And that happens, that's life. As I say, this college group we get together, it used to be so big, and this last time there was just so few. And the fellow who mostly hosted it, he was the ex-Marine, just by chance, said, we'll still get together and have dinner or something, but he's not going to have this. And I'm just going to show you these things over here, Darcy.
We just...
Butter and husband, he was an ex-Marine. He got that down for us down at the PX down in New London. That was out in front of the post office. I don't know if they have these metal posters anymore. The post office in Avon, and our friend who lives across from the post office, they were getting rid of it and getting something else and asked if we wanted it. And this is the one that I said, the Iwo Jima. And Brian had this made up for his father especially. That's Semper Fi, which means Semper Fidelis, which is the motto of the Marine Corps, always faithful.
And this is the Marine Bear.
How many times did you wear them?
Not very many times.
How much did it cost? Well, of course, it still wouldn't have been much compared to prices nowadays.
Oh, I don't know. Good.
Well, what happened in New York?
Well, I was wearing that, and the waiter had the same kind of pants.
These are the Marine Blues?
Yeah,
Right
what they
here?
call the dress
Dress Blues.
blues.
Okay.
all his medals and ribbons are away someplace. Those are the only ones.
What medal is this, Grandpa?
That was just campaigns.
Oh.
Certain operations they have a special rhythm.
So the rest of them are someplace we don't know where. And that was his summer uniform that he got just to get married.
What medals did you win? Or did you get?
I didn't win any particular medals.
Marines didn't get many medals unless they were really outstanding, like the Silver Star, right? And Marines didn't get the Bronze Star. I never heard of the Marines getting the Bronze Star.
No.
No, they don't seem to get them. I guess they just took it for granted that, you were supposed to do your job.
Well, the Marines altogether were the best, so
Right,
that
of
meant
course.
they would have had to give them to everyone.
Of course, right.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I hope the project is a success.
Is there anything else you guys would like to comment on?
You want to say anything more? You got your chance before the camera?
No. I can't think of much else to say right now.
Yeah. What are they dying? The veterans are dying now at, 1,500 a day?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, people will be able to look back on this one.
But I don't know where it is.
When was this from? This newspaper article?
This is from the Bridgeport Sunday Herald. And this PM Daily, I think that was a New York paper for a while. I don't think they have it anymore. I don't know.
What's that say?
The Japs are lying. This is the installing. What's the date? August 14th. It was all over.
Right, August 6th and August 9th.
Yeah, that's the day that it happened, the 14th. So, maybe of course, they didn't sign the actual treaty till the next month, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.